Welcome back to Adventures of a Black Belt Sommelier. Excited to tell you that we are now sponsored by Four Paws Restaurant, the iconic fine dining restaurant in St. Paul, Minnesota, in a beautiful mansion built in 1870. And I'm also excited to tell you that starting next Tuesday, I will be the sommelier there, which I'm looking forward to. Um, I am going to share with you today that I am very unhappy about something. There is a review of Thomas Keller's flagship restaurants, the French Laundry and Versailles, French Laundry in Napa Valley, Versailles in New York City, in the New York Times this week, which is extremely negative. I have to tell you, Thomas and I have been friends for a long time since we worked together at a restaurant in Nashville called the Wild Boar, which was his last chef position before he opened the French Laundry. I have dined at the French Laundry 4 times. I've dined at Versailles 3 times. I've also dined at quite a few of the most extraordinary, acclaimed restaurants in the Western Hemisphere. I've been at Taillevent in Paris several times before Joe Povrino died, when it was regarded as the best restaurant in the world. Atelier Joel Robuchon in Paris, Alinea in Chicago, the Inn at Blackberry Farm, Highlands Bar and Grill the week it won James Beard Award for Restaurant of the Year. Um, on La Bernardin in New York, Lutèce in New York, I think is the best restaurant in America I've ever eaten at years ago. Um, Maisonette in Cincinnati, Mobile Travel Guide 5-star restaurant. I also was lucky enough to eat Thomas's food every day at the Wild Boar when he was the chef there. Um, I have never dined at one of Thomas's restaurants when my experience was not absolutely superb. Um, I even in early September when I was in Napa, I had dinner at his bistro, Bouchon, down the street from the French Laundry, and it was as good as any meal I've ever eaten anywhere. And that was his bistro, not the French Laundry or Versailles. But the thing is, critics, they can have their opinion, but their opinions aren't always right. Years ago at a restaurant my first ever restaurant management job, sommelier job at a restaurant in Nashville called Julian's, we were criticized because our coquille Saint-Jacques au citron vert, which was translate in French to scallops in lime butter, it was a lime beurre with lime, um, wasn't the ubiquitous, boring, Americanized version of coquille Saint-Jacques, which was, on every restaurant menu back then, with the scallops sauteed in a cream sauce with mushrooms and put in a scallop shell that you bought in cans and ringed with tape, mashed potatoes that baked off in the oven and looked pretty. A restaurant, actually really good restaurant, critic criticized us because our coquille Saint-Jacques wasn't what she considered coquille Saint-Jacques. It never occurred to her, I guess, to call us and say, why is your coquille Saint-Jacques not what every other restaurant I've ever been to called coquille Saint-Jacques? Our chef was French. I think he knew better than her what coquille Saint-Jacques and citron vert should be. And in my restaurant, F. Scott's, we got criticized once by a different restaurant critic because our Caesar salad didn't contain oregano. I wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper and asked why we were being criticized for not having an ingredient that the Caesar salad should contain. And she responded that she'd read in a church lady's cookbook that Caesar salad contained oregano. You can put oregano in a Caesar salad dressing if you want to, but it won't add to it. It'll add to it, but it won't improve it. But here's the thing. If you wanted to write an article about Thomas Keller, you could write an article about the enormous, almost immeasurable contributions that he has made to fine dining in America. You could write an article about the fact that he captained the American Culinary Olympics team, which was the first one to win the Bocuse d'Or. You could write an article about all the great chefs all over the world who consider them their mentor. Guys like Gavin Kaysen here in the Twin Cities, Rene Redzepi at Noma, the best restaurant in the world, Grant Achatz at Alinea in Chicago, and on and on and on and on. But no, you choose to criticize Thomas because his restaurant served 3 or 4 dishes that they've served since he opened the French Laundry 30 years ago and per se 20 years. The problem is that this person didn't consider is that if you went to the French Laundry or per se, and he didn't serve you the salmon cornet, if he didn't serve you the oyster controls, if he didn't serve you the coffee and donuts, you would be bitterly disappointed. His guests demand that he have these dishes on the menu. And they may not, the oysters and pearls may not make you laugh when he serves it to you as it did 30 years ago, but it's still the same extraordinary, creative, inventive, delicious dish. Thomas is the consummate professional chef. His kitchens are immaculate. His staffs revere him. You know, when I was in Napa, I went by and had a glass of champagne with him. Well, I had a glass of champagne. He had a glass of something green colored. And we walked around the restaurant. He took me in the back of the house, in the wine cellar, and through the kitchen. And he spoke to every single employee that he passed. He either patted them on the back or shook their hand or had something kind to say to them. You could tell every single interaction how much it meant to these people. As I said, his kitchens are immaculate. His food cost is exactly what you want it to be. His people revere him. His customers love his food. People line up to get reservations to eat his restaurants because they are so extraordinary. And I'm going to tell you a story that illustrates, 2 stories illustrate a perfect example who Thomas Keller is. I have a friend named Josh Hoppinger. He owns a really, really extraordinary restaurant in Nashville now. He did a stage at the French Laundry. He went to work at 7 o'clock on Wednesday morning to start his stage. And Thomas Keller was sweeping the floor in the kitchen. He didn't tell somebody or ask somebody to sweep the floor. The floor needed to be swept. He swept the floor. 8 Michelin stars, and he's sweeping the floor. Several years ago at my store in Nashville, I had made a sale of $450,000 of Domaine de la Romanée-Conti burgundies to a customer. And that was an exciting moment, obviously. I wrote him an email, the customer, an email, and said, I would like to take him and his wife to dinner at any restaurant in America to thank them for this extraordinary purchase. Luckily for me, he picked Versailles. So I emailed Thomas and I told him we'd like to come at Thursday night at 6:30. There's 3 of us. I would like this to be the greatest meal any of us has ever eaten. I don't want to see a menu. I don't want to see a wine list. I don't want to see a bill. Here's my credit card. Just charge it. And I gave him a budget, which was 10% of the profit that I'd made on this large sale, which was quite a bit of money. Maybe not by per se standards, quite a bit of money, but by my standards, quite a bit. We went to dinner. When we sat down, there was a personal note from Thomas to each of us thanking us for joining him that night. Boy, well, I don't want to say the other 2 people's names, but personal note to us. He happened to be in New York that night. He came out and we had a glass of wine. He didn't have a glass of wine because it was during service, but he sat down and chatted with us for a few minutes during service, which I honestly, I've never seen him do before since. He arranged for us to drink a bottle of unbelievably great wine from an importer that I did a lot of business with at the time. No charge. I mean, one of the most sought after wines in the world. This meal was extraordinary. The service was extraordinary. The wines were extraordinary. Grounded in classic French cuisine with playful touches and humor and creativity. And it was. And at the end of the meal, there was a personal note from each of us thanking us again. Well, then I waited for my credit card statement. When I got the bill on my credit card, it was 75% of the budget that I give in. Thomas Keller is an extraordinarily generous, humble, gifted professional. I hope that this person that wrote this review for the New York Times dreams of contributing 10% to culinary culture in America of what Thomas Keller has done and continues to do. And I guarantee you this, if you go to dinner at the French Laundry tonight, you are going to have an extraordinary meal. If you go to dinner at Per Se tonight, you are going to have an extraordinary meal. If you go to Bouchon, you are going to have an extraordinary meal. I guarantee it. Years ago, I read a book by an author named Leonard Bernstein, not Leonard Bernstein, the conductor, but just a random guy named Leonard Bernstein, about his experiences dining out in great restaurants in New York City. Lutèce, which I regard with great reverence, had been criticized in the New York Times again for their duck with raspberry sauce. That you shouldn't order the duck with raspberry sauce. You should only order the duck with orange sauce. Leonard Bernstein went to dinner. A few nights later, he was with some friends, and they asked him how his dinner was at Lutèce. He said, superb as always. They asked him what he had. He said, I had the roast duck. And somebody said, well, did you have the raspberry sauce or the orange sauce? He said, I would never consider having the orange sauce because my good friend Andre Solner, if I'd ordered the orange sauce, would know why, and he would feel betrayed. I remember this story. It's 40 years later. I wish I could find the book. I can't. Feel the same way about this that he did about the duck with raspberry sauce. Thomas Keller is an American treasure. He deserves every bit of success that he's had. And his restaurants are as good as any in the world. Thank you for tuning into Adventures of Black Belt Sommelier.